Hello, and thank you for joining us for our discussion on harnessing the power of hybrid cloud. The world of federal government information technology is fast growing and highly innovative. Experts predict that the government cloud market size will reach almost $83 billion by 2030. As stronger and more effective solutions are introduced, alignment between leaders in the public and private sectors is increasingly necessary. My name is Victoria Hodge, and I'm an associate product manager here at Leadership Connect. I'm joined by esteemed panelist Imran Bashir, Chief Technology Officer for ITC Federal, John Sinkovich, Managing Director of Linden Logic and Cloud Platform Executive, and Josh Stageberg, Vice President of Product at SolarWinds. Today, we will cover the challenges and opportunities of the hybrid cloud and learn best practices from our panel of experts. Whether you're new to the federal IT space or a seasoned expert in cloud technology, you'll be sure to walk away with new insights. I invite our audience to participate by leaving questions in the chat, and we'll have time at the end for a Q&A. I'd like to begin by giving everyone a bit of background on our panelist. Tell us about what led you to a career in the federal IT space. Let's start with Imran. I think you're muted.
That would help. Thank you, Tatiana, and to Leadership Connect for inviting us. It's certainly a very important topic as government is evolving into emerging technologies and leveraging that. My name is Imran Bashir, as Victoria said. I'm CTO for ITC Federal. I started out my career in commercial space with telecom for a number of years. And then I moved to Battelle Memorial Institute, a nonprofit research organization that focuses on harder problems for federal government. And that's where I got into federal government and business and working with them to help me solve that. So I worked with Battelle for 10 years, working with Health and Human Services primarily, but Department of Homeland Security as well, as it was forming at that time. And then after that, I switched to a relatively small organization that grew very quickly as John and I joined. Actually, John will be talking about that. So, but we focused on cloud around maybe a little over 10 years ago, 12 years ago. We started building the cloud, and that's where government was getting into learning more about cloud. And I think it was a very good time for us to accompany and support government in their journey from both programmatic as well as technical perspectives. So here we are today, some scars to show for all that great journey that we have had, but I wouldn't trade it for anything else. It has been an awesome journey to work with both private sector as well as government.
Thank you. John, what about you?
Thanks. And as Imran mentioned, we actually worked together a decade ago and did some really fun stuff. So it's great to be on a call with him. And thanks everyone for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what I think is just an amazing time in public sector. My background, like Imran's, pretty diverse. I was actually in engineering in the auto industry, did some work in telecommunications also, and then really expanded into public sector. And then most recently was leading a private equity backed cloud managed service provider and an ISV, and really focused on this highly regulated, whether it was commercial or public sector. And one of the things that I've always been drawn to in public sector, at least, is really the mission. These are citizen services that I participate in, and being able to do that, whether it's in healthcare, whether it goes all the way over into say national security and defense. There's just a really large need to drive commercial innovation into these environments. And I think much like Imran, just been very fortunate to be able to make, I think, some impacts along the way, and think that the even bigger things are coming down the road for us, especially in the regulated and secure compliance markets.
Thank you, John. Josh, tell us about your professional background and what led you to the federal IT space.
Sure. So echoing John and Imran, thanks for having us on the panel this morning. I started my professional career working for the University of California. So that was not only my alma mater, but it was where I found my first IT job. And we were at that time looking at doing this sort of very controversial, at least with the faculty and the staff, idea of centrally hosting services for all the different departments, right? And that sort of got me interested in something that later became called SaaS at the time. And so that led me to, startup land to do sort of multi-tenant software as a service. And as we sort of matured that business over a few years, we started to look at we started to get government customers interested in this, right? There were a couple executive orders that came out early on around cloud adoption and FedRAMP, and sort of watching that sort of move along. So that's kind of been my the things that excite me the most is figuring out how to bring cloud and SaaS into the public sector. And then what I've done recently is while I've sort of always had public sector as part of the large enterprise products that I've led for many years. I'm a product manager, right? So what I for enterprise B2B products mainly, right? And coming to SolarWinds, I was so excited to see the ways that SolarWinds helps public sector customers, right? I was at a conference last week where a member of our defense services came up to me and said, SolarWinds changed my life on the ground in this country, right? And that to me is just like, that's why we're here, right? So that's kind of that's what excites me. And I oversee public sector globally for SolarWinds, which includes everything from education, state, federal, civilian, DoD, all that stuff. So
Thank you. And I think what's interesting is that all three of your stories highlight how this particular space is where innovation meets mission, and that's really the core there and the through line. John, I'd love for you to tell us a bit of an overview of the benefits and drawbacks of various cloud solutions that are present right now in the federal space.
Sure. So, I mean, I think providers, particularly my focus has been in the hyperscalers, the AWS, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, and there's a lot of other providers, SolarWinds included. And I think it's just so impressive. They're spending billions of dollars a month, and really public sector gets to step back. So I think one of the huge benefits is just the investments that are being made by private sector. And this includes in public sector compliant regions, classified regions, all available on demand and through marketplaces. I mean, I think that's just an amazing ability for public sector to take advantage of all that investment. And then in terms of drawbacks, I'm probably a little biased. I don't really see a ton, but I do think it takes a lot of planning and for customers, and really that, looking at that long-term ROI is really significant as far as how it's going to support those missions. And I think there's just a lot of partners and providers that can help in that process. But I think if things don't go well, it's usually, I think, in that initial planning, that initial roadmap piece where, alignments just aren't made between requirements and kind of what the solution can do. But if that's done correctly, I just think it's a great opportunity.
Definitely. I love how you said there really aren't that many drawbacks. It's all positive in some ways. And Ron, can you tell us about why does hybrid cloud in particular stand out?
Yeah, I think so. What John is talking about, and in terms of some of the, I think he hinted at some of the drawbacks there, right? There is a lot of perception also, right, about cloud and its security around it, as well as dependence on network and legacy systems that are in there and all that. I think that's where the hybrid cloud, I mean, there was a time, as Josh and John both can speak, and Tatiana, you can talk about that too, is there was a time when everybody wanted to do cloud. And then they say, oh, no, we realize that it's not necessarily everything is well suited for cloud. So we should start looking at application rationalizations and, creating roadmaps and be very judicious about what is suitable for cloud and what's not. And then there was this, as this evolved more and more, and customers' needs, they matured and they started realizing the benefits of both. They started seeing that, if there are network sensitive loads, then maybe the hybrid is a better answer. If there's a data sensitivity issue where it needs to stay more in a specific area, geographical area, and all that, maybe that's another great opportunity for hybrid cloud workloads, and we have the best of both worlds. And again, compliance, whether you want to do failover backup, whether you want to reduce your latency in your access, and all of these can contribute towards building a great hybrid architecture. And I think that's what draws me towards it, is that you can architect by leveraging the best of both on-prem capabilities, as well as what is scalability and innovation and the volume that is available in cloud. So that's what I think excites me most about hybrid cloud computing.
The best of both worlds in some ways. I mean, that's
Exactly.
A good way to put it. Yeah.
It gives you a tool to be more open in terms of designing your architecture. Now you have a bigger options, right? And that's can be more innovative, more creative architectures.
Definitely. Josh, you mentioned that you work with a variety of different federal agencies in your work at SolarWinds. From your perspective, what do you feel are the biggest challenges that are facing the world of federal IT?
Yeah. So I guess in the context of hybrid cloud, I just wanted to first go back to Imran's comment around architecture, right? And I love that he's pushing on architecture to get the value out of both cloud and on-prem, right? Because that, I think, I couldn't agree more, right? That's where you can unlock the value in these hybrid environments, right? I think that we're seeing, at least from my point of view, like we're seeing sort of distinct camps, right? If I can use that word without getting too specific, right? We're seeing folks that are really concerned about being able to operate in completely disconnected environments, right? And one of those, whether that's a air-gapped space, or whether that's on a ship that may lose connectivity, right, during an exercise, right, or whether it's being able to handle through like severe interruptions or cyber attacks, right? So there's sort of a decent cohort that's focused on maintaining that operational resilience for mission, right? There's another cohort that is that's really looking to, and I won't repeat what Imran said, right? But like that, looking at like how do we really leverage the best of both worlds, right? And then we have sort of yet another cohort that I think is still on the path of like whatever I can get out of managing, whatever I can get out of like however I can show more going to cloud, going to SaaS, right? And I think the reason for that, again, was so excited about Imran's comments, right? Like security, compliance, right? Like where my data lives, right? Those things tend to be big drivers for this, right? And what you don't want to do, is you don't want to end up reaching the implementation phase of your project and then realizing that you haven't checked the boxes around like what type of data is this, like where can it live, how secure does it have to be, right? What do we really have to what are the values we're really trying to get out of this data, right? Those types of things. And so those really have to get forwarded to the front. And so I guess without going on for very much longer, to me, the data that you're using and the value that you want to get out of that data kind of has to be the beginning of the conversation now, right? And whereas I think, if we rewind, I don't know, maybe this dates myself, but if we rewind enough years, right, the data was kind of the end of the conversation, right? Like so that's kind of where I see people moving from, like from across that spectrum, from like the data at the end of the conversation, the data beginning at the conversation, and that data at the beginning of the conversation then drives things like the architecture we were talking about, then drives things like the decisions of where to stand up. So that's, I hope I answered your question, but I'll give folks the other folks a chance to talk.
No, definitely. I think you have to think about that criteria and that ground level of where are we coming from, what's the focus here, and when you narrow in on the data as the start of the question and then branch off from that, I think that's the right direction there. I think for all three of you, you've had careers where you've seen technology solutions from inception to fruition. And so I'd love to hear about a success story and what worked, what didn't, what you learned from it. John, can you tell us a little bit about a story where you saw that implementation go and what you learned from it?
Sure. So lots of things to choose from. Fortunately, I think we've been part of a lot of really interesting things that just worked. And I would say most recently, going back to this theme of how you drive innovation in, we were working with a low-code software provider who had this amazing platform, but it was all being deployed on these on-premise environments. And really, they just wanted to sell their software, and then they were having the customers implement it. And a lot of customers just weren't being all that successful, and they were having outages or they didn't configure it correctly. And then they'd come back to that low-code platform and say, hey, your software doesn't work. And it was just this constant kind of conflict between like who's really responsible for this whole thing to work. And both of them looked and said, I have a piece of it, but not the whole. And we were able to partner with this company and really go in and kind of utilize cloud, deliver it in a SaaS environment where the customer was getting really a better product. They didn't have to manage it. They got a better cost profile. And then I think the real kicker is we were able to take it through some of the compliance around, FedRAMP and some of the DISA and some of the state compliance and get it stamped for approval. And then all of a sudden you just have all these barriers that a customer looks at and says, great, you don't have to worry about any of that anymore. And it was one of those things where if you look, like kind of everybody won. The customer got a better product at a better price. The provider, the low-code platform was able to really just focus on selling software and designing software. We had a new customer for our platform, which was great. The cloud provider got more volume coming onto there. So it's one of those things that I think, fortunately, you step back and kind of everybody won. And that platform continues to do really well. So that's probably a good example of something I've been involved in recently.
That's a great example. I think when you can walk away and say everybody won, that's the perfect case scenario. Imran, can you tell us an example from your career of implementation of a solution and how did it go and what worked and what didn't?
No, that's a great question. And as John said, as you asked that question, I was thinking about, there are stories at the very early stage of cloud adoption. Then there are stories which are very recent, and then everything in between. I think I'm going to just talk about one story because it was very transformative in the sense of the cloud adoption, right? John and I were working with NARA, and they were managing their infrastructure and everything, and they wanted to do that. So what we proposed to them is more of a managed service environment, which was a relatively new concept at that time. They were bold enough to take that on. They issued, and since there was no real operating model for that, we had to create it all from scratch, not only the technical side of things, but also the pricing side of things. So that how do you, with the cloud, with the scalable model, what do you do with the, how do you charge for the time of a system administrator, right? Kind of a thing, right? So all of those things we had to work together to come up with both, a solution for operating that a cloud operating model, a pricing model, cost model that would be acceptable both for government as well as the service provider, as well as the cloud service provider to manage that, right? So all of these things played together. I mean, honored to say that government loved that. We have had that project for a number of years and continue to support them at there as they do great big things there. I mean, I have so many other stories, but obviously I don't want to take Josh's and John's time away. But that was one of my favorite because of it transformed federal government from a procuring infrastructures and servers and storage to a managed services model, which is the true leveraging the true benefits of cloud. I think that's we were very excited about about that entire program there.
Thank you, Imran. Josh, what about you?
I want to talk a little bit about the importance of like procurement in terms of success here, right? So riffing again off Imran. So I feel like I should do more webinars with Imran. Anyway, the procurement piece I think can be a win in it itself, right? And I don't mean like whether you're buying on GSA contract or whether you're buying, through another contract vehicle. What I mean is when we as private sector create the right level of flexibility in terms of the way that we license, right, to organizations, right? And I'll give you I think it in public sector, especially in federal, right, it makes a huge difference, right? So I'll give you a couple specific examples, right, just from conversations that I've had in the last couple of weeks that have been going on for the last 2 years, right? Is when a federal customer needs to expand the number of licenses they have for software, whether it's delivered as software as a service or self-hosted, right? That can create some barriers, right? Especially if it's mid sort of in the middle of a contract, right? Like let's say you sign a 1-year contract. A lot of time goes into thinking about how much I need of X license, right? And if you need to expand in the middle, right, you can run into budget considerations, you can run into cycle problems, you can run into like it can create a lot of issues, right? So one of the things that I thought was really cool, and I was not behind this in transparency, like I did not plan this, but one of the things that turned out to be really cool for our federal customers was that we created a license type. Was, if you're familiar with SolarWinds at all, we have like a lot of different products that people can use. And what we've done is we've created a license type where you can license what we actually called hybrid cloud observability, but that's sort of a grouping of a lot of the main products that folks use. And when you do that, you have the flexibility to use that license in different products, right? And just a simple change like that made it so that our federal customers, right, that realized that we did all this pre-planning, right, around how many licenses we need, right, and we found that actually we want licenses for X module and not Y module, right? Now that sort of that complexity goes away, right? And now they can just start using that other module that they wanted to use, that other capability that they wanted to use. And so I think, I have a couple more examples like that, but I won't go on. But it's like just seemingly, things that I don't think are really as hard to surmount in the private sector, right? That can really make life a lot easier and make missions a lot more likely to sort of succeed on budget, right? Which is becoming, I think, increasingly important. Are those types of things that industry needs to pay a lot of attention to, and certainly I'm seeing positive feedback from those types of behaviors.
Definitely. I think a key element there is you listened to the market and you understood that flexibility was the key there. Like you figured out where that differentiator would be. And so collaboration, communication, listening to your partners in the federal government, I think is a really key driver of success here. John, can you tell us about how those factors have helped you in your career? How have you focused on that collaboration element and making sure that the solution that you're driving forward is actually helping them?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it can't be overstated, the importance around, just like today, different people have different views, making sure you're just willing to listen. And I think that at times we don't do a good enough job doing that. You feel like the customer is in one kind of bucket, and then there's partners in another bucket, and then there's even within that partner community, there's different buckets. And so one of the things I've seen work really well is just how do you break down those silos and have interactions like we're having today, where you just start talking. And when you do that, I've never seen that not work. It might be a little choppy as everyone gets used to how to do that effectively. But I think going back, these are really important missions. I mean, everybody on this call is leveraging everything that this public sector provides as a citizen. So I think it's even more important in public sector because the missions are so important, whether it's healthcare, whether it's national security, whether it's something we had some interaction with the Department of Interior and like national parks. And it's this fascinating mission. And you're like, boy, I've used those services before. And so you start to understand if you can all just, have that interaction. And I think going back to some other points, that 360 kind of view, like, granted, this is great for me. Okay, well, what's good for everybody? And maybe finding some middle ground where it's not the best thing for everybody, but at least there's something in there for everybody. When you can take that kind of approach, I think, generally good things are going to happen.
And Ron, can you speak to that as well? Have you also experienced that those have been drivers in the solutions that you all have implemented?
Yeah, and I tell you, John is being very humble about it. He's very good at that. I think I'll just tell you from a collaboration side of thing. So John was the first one actually who created a cloud assessment metrics type of a thing, and that was a structured approach for us to talk to customers, understand where they are. At times when customers themselves did not know, right, what they wanted out of cloud and what they could potentially get out of cloud. So John broke it down by different aspects. I helped from a technology standpoint, but primarily from a business standpoint, talking to customers where their needs are, the operations team's needs, the development team's needs, security team's needs. He broke it down into those categories and questions, and then created some scored-based answers, right? That helped us make a very data-driven decisions about what are customers' priorities. They love the collaboration when they talk. They realized what they wanted versus when they walked into a meeting, they had a completely different understanding of what they wanted to do. So I think those kind of tool structured approaches and constantly asking them the right questions in the right category to the right people gave us a tremendous advantage in terms of designing the solutions for what the customers were looking for. And then, I mean, there was it's hilarious to call it a success story right now, but there was a time when we stood up SharePoint on 2 servers in AWS, and it was a breakthrough for excuse me, for our customer. But that incremental, understanding customers, giving them something to look at, then learning from it, growing from that, expanding the horizons, and in a kind of a risk-averse manner, we were able to do that collaboration and help them guide into cloud and help them with take the advantage of all the offerings, all the benefits that cloud had to offer. So,
Thank you. And I think you really hit on a key point there of trying to get them to take advantage of all the benefits there.
Yeah.
There can be an aspect of risk aversion in this space. So it's a hard discussion to have in some ways. But Josh, can you also speak to that? How have collaboration and just communication with your federal partners been a driver of success here?
Yeah, I want to go back to something John said, which I really liked, which was like breaking down silos, right? Um, one thing that, I think there's a tendency to like operate in our own environments, right? And whether that's, and I think, Imran mentioned like the IT versus like the, finance versus the other group, right? Like, and you can go on. But I think as the private sector, there's a lot of opportunity for us to partner in the state, in the federal, in the education, in the DoD space, right? To help to connect silos that exist there that aren't just, this is my IT team, this is my, you know, mission team for this mission, right? It's more like, did you know, three-letter group that, other three-letter group is using these types of tools to accomplish this type of thing for their mission, right? Because I think often the reaction that you get is, wait, someone's figured this out already. And I mean, it's not that the like federal CIOs are a pretty close-knit group in my experience, right? Like they'll pick up the phone and call the next one, right? If they're not, I mean, they may not get together in person every day, right? But they definitely have strong connectivity, right? And so when they hear that another group has had success with something, with some project, with some solution, getting to some value on mission, right? They're the reaction that I get is like, wow, that's so exciting. I'm gonna go call them, right? And I think there's a real opportunity there because in the sort of as vendors, right? I think we see a lot of different pieces, and we can help the government sort of move faster towards their mission goals if we connect some of those dots for them. Now, that's not always appropriate, right? Like, we can't. You have to be a little bit. You're not. It's like. You might have a VA doing something, right? And that's very different than something that like Census is doing, right? For example, or you might have Navy doing something that you don't get to discuss, right? But in the aggregate, right? I think we have an opportunity to break down more silos, right? So.
Definitely. I think the private sector is in a unique place where you're able to be more innovative and you're able to kind of see the whole big picture and then offer that. Our audience is coming from different perspectives. Some of them might be very new to the space, some of them might be more seasoned. If you had one piece of advice to someone who might be embarking on a new cloud implementation, what would it be? Let's start with Imran.
Sorry, I have to unmute myself every time because of my cold and I want it. Okay, so I think one thing that we always suggested, even when people were starting with a very small project in cloud and they'll even have a proof of concept, we always suggested that they should be thinking of a overall adoption strategy, a roadmap, and how they are going to do the governance of that environment, complete governance, right? So that anybody who is starting out new in the cloud implementation federal space, I would say that make sure that you're starting with a complete strategy that aligns with your agency or department's strategic objectives, right? You have your goals, objectives. Make sure that whatever your cloud adoption strategies aligns with that, right? So set those metrics, set those expected outcomes, set those benefits of adoption, right? Do that application rationalization on, say, what is going to work for in cloud or not. I mean, what we had done at one point was that we created a decision matrix, again, where we assigned scores for each of these types of, your technology stack, your business need, your application is going to retire in it, the number of users, the security needs, all that. Different things we assign score. And then depending on, I mean, you have to look at yourself as which one is more important to that, right? So defining that strategy aligned with your business strategy, defining your application rationalization, what makes sense, hybrid, cloud, multi-cloud, whatever, and then defining a cloud operating model where you say, how are you going to do the governance, what roles and what people upskills you would need to do that processes and all that as well. I mean, I can go on and on there, but that's I again would start with a bigger picture, not narrow it down to one project, and then because you may make some mistakes that could haunt you later down the road.
Josh, do you have any advice for someone working to implement a new solution?
Yeah. I think the first thing that I would advise is, like, if you're not in the sort of CISO group or in the sort of security group, I'd say, like, try to get a pulse check first, right, from those folks. I think there's what I'd say is today, right? Today, 2024, 2023, there's a lot more appetite for understanding, to Imran's point, like, what are the risks, what are the benefits, what are our, what are our business goals? Can we have a larger picture here, right? Than even just a few years back, right? From the security teams, right? But I think, and so you might be surprised, like, you might think, I'm just not going to have access to use because everybody sees what AWS is doing, everybody sees what GCP or Azure is. I think John gave a long list of hyperscalers, right? But, like, everyone sees what these folks are doing, right? And to a lesser extent, maybe you see what SaaS providers are doing, and you might be thinking, wow, I really want that. I could be so much more effective in my mission. We could be so much more effective in our mission if we had that, but we just won't be able to have it, right? And I think my advice is, you'd be surprised how open I think like CIO and security organizations in the federal space are to having those conversations. Now, they may not be open to taking on undue risk, but they're definitely open to having those conversations in a way that I don't think was there, just let's say pre-pandemic. And so, but there's also the chance that you're going to go and talk to them and they're going to say absolutely not, and you're going to be and so you don't want to go down that path, right? So anyway, so I guess in summary, I'm saying, like, explore, feel like, check to see if you have the permission to explore, even if you checked a couple years ago, right? If you had the permission to explore, because that permission might be there now in a way that it wasn't there before, and I think that that's actually super exciting for public sector at large. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and I think that open to exploration piece is happening at a faster pace than we even realize. John, what about you? What advice might you have?
Sure. So I think just looking at the team on the call, this is decades of experience in terms of lots of things, lots of lessons learned. And so I would just, really, really strongly recommend, if you're about to embark on something, get out there and talk to a bunch of industry experts, and talk to SolarWinds, bring in companies like ITC, and really just ask them, look, because here's the thing, we're willing to talk. We'll take those calls, and I think at times, the more we can do that in a collaborative way, the better. And specifically in public sector, there's people want to help. The other thing, just I would say, is going with an open mind. There's lots of different approaches. I think Josh hit on some things as far as different models that can be adapted. You might think, oh, it's going to be a piece of hardware I'm going to put in, it's going to sit on my premise. Maybe not. Maybe it's an image that'll be put into a hyperscaler, or maybe it is a device. But just go in with an open mind, because technology is spinning so quickly. You might think you have it all mapped out, but if you've done that, it's kind of doing a disservice by not allowing industry to kind of come in and let you know what's going on. And so give yourself plenty of time to do that, and a lot of lessons learned.
And if you don't mind, Victoria, I'd like to add to both Josh's and John's comments around that. As John said, there's so much has gone in this maturity of cloud and hybrid cloud and multi-cloud and whatnot, right? Now you don't have to start from scratch again. There's many of those solutions that have been developed based on the experience of people. Use those pre-existing platforms, those pre-existing foundational building blocks that you can very quickly put together for your, accelerate your time to market, for features to take to market, right? So leverage, at ITC, what we do, as John mentioned, thank you, John, for mentioning us. But one of the things we do is that we focus on platform engineering, where we build these accelerators, these industry or government or customer specific platforms, so that if you're building a chatbot, you don't have to start from scratch. You have a accelerator that we can provide you, so you can focus on your knowledge base. If you're building DevSecOps, we have a accelerator that puts all that pipeline together for you. You don't have to start from scratch every time. All of these pre-built solutions, whether commercially available or through these consulting companies or private sector, is available for you to build your solutions very quickly, experiment with them very quickly, and if it does not go your way, you will learn very quickly and adjust the course. So I think that was a great point about leveraging all the experience that private and sector has had over this last decade or more.
Definitely, you can think of it like a springboard in a way. It's like
Yes,
the
exactly.
platform, you can jump even further from it. One thing that we've discussed briefly, but we haven't dug too far into, is balancing the demands of data privacy in this space as well. Josh, can you speak to that? How does the private sector, who's in this space working with our federal government partners, how do they balance the needs of the data privacy concerns that the federal side might have?
Well, so I think privacy and security are pretty closely related, and I go back to I think this panel commented earlier on how far we've come, right? And I can't sort of say it's just been the private sector that's come that far, right? The public sector has also come quite a ways, right? Whether it's through sort of prompting from the OMB based on executive orders, whether it's NIST standards being updated, whether it's sort of looking for more standardized sort of security and operational controls, right? I think that there's a whole, I guess the word I want to use, and maybe I'm not using it correctly, but it's like there's so much more almost like literacy on both sides around what security and privacy mean. And I think that alone has really helped us to shape, in the private sector, has helped us to shape offerings that make a lot more sense. I would say that privacy itself, just to answer your question more directly, like privacy is for government at least, I think privacy feels like a rapidly changing space, almost as much as like cloud is a rapidly changing space. You look at the California Consumer Privacy Act, and how that's starting to affect the way that like state governments are thinking of data privacy, and the way that that looks a whole lot more like the GDPR than it looks like anything that we've had in the United States to date, right? Um, you look at like NYDFS and sort of what they're doing around, because they have all the banks and financials, but they keep writing security requirements. Security requirements are increasingly talking about like what kind of data it is. So like there's a lot of movement in this space, and I think that's good. I think um, I think if I had to give like the highest level of sort of advice here, I would say um, try to think about privacy like you would think about security, right? Um, so uh, be explicit, be thoughtful, put it up front, right? We talk about secure by design a lot these days in sort of the federal space. Um, Privacy by design is not a new concept, right? And it's something that I think if you think of those sort of as similar, you'll have a head start, right, on any project.
Thank you. John or Imran, do you have any thoughts to add to that conversation on data privacy and security?
I'll just kind of throw out, I think this is an
Yeah.
area within public sector, often when we're, in the commercial industry, people actually reference the fact that we're coming from public sector where this is, data privacy and security and compliance really are areas that I think public sector, day one, that's the first thing you're towards Josh's point, that's part of the design cycle. And so I think this is an area where public sector actually leads, in many cases, we've thought through a lot of these things, and I think you'll see it now with, some of the Gen AI, which I give everyone credit for not talking. We went almost 45 minutes and we have not thrown out Gen AI, which might be a record. But I do think there's a lot of concerns around things, and I think public sector really leads in, leveraging whether it's global public sector, like what's going on in Europe, or whether it's just what the US government has done. So I think it's a good spot for us to be a leader and really some of those lessons learned that everyone can benefit from.
Thank you. So I'd like to turn to some of the audience questions that have been posed in the chat. One of them is when building connections with the public sector and decision makers as influencers, what do you all find are some green and red flags for a good partner or a good champion? I know we mentioned open-mindedness and open to exploration and how that's been obviously an increasing demand in the public sector over time. Are there any other aspects that you all look for when you're partnering up with people in the public sector? Let's start with Imran.
Yeah, I think so. That's a really good question. I think, and a lot of time you have to do a check on, whether things are headed in the right direction or not. But one of the things that I've always seen to be a red flag is that if somebody is trying to boil the ocean and try to do everything in one go, that is always, not always, but it's a probability of not succeeding is much higher. So incrementally adopting the way to go, and just if they have a specific use case which is isolated from their other environments,
and they have well-defined use case for that, that's an ideal place to start. So so as long as that they have their objectives well-defined, scoped, and are like close to reality and feasible, that's where I think our guidance in what we talked about, assessments and discovery questionnaires and so on, we help them guide that to say, are you good with starting with this as a starting point with this, outcome? And those are some of the things I think I would suggest that we should do as a green flag versus a red flag.
John, what about you? Have you noticed any green or red flags in your partnerships throughout your career?
Sure. I think one of the things, if you're out there trying to see whether an opportunity looks like a good one, anytime a customer, and we're trying to push more of this, is asking about outcomes versus kind of being very prescriptive. If a customer, if you're seeing, hey, look, you come to us industry or partners with the best solution, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. We're not going to tell you we want 5 of these and they're going to be all red and they're a certain size, or give us a chance to innovate. And I think probably less than looking for red flags, that's a really big green flag. If you can get customers talking, because I think the more we do that, the more you really start to innovate, because you've got a lot of ability to kind of solution and be flexible. And who knows what, you put 6 smart people together, they might come up with some idea you hadn't thought about. So any customers, I continue to try and push that with customers. Don't tell us how to do it, just tell us what you want as an outcome. And so I would say that's a trend that I think is really good for everybody, customers and the industry.
Definitely. Josh, do you have any other green or red flags to add to that conversation?
I just say, like, it's always, I think any project that involves, like, speaking as, I mean, we're an ISV, right? But as an ISV, right, like, one of the things that is sort of really helpful in terms of successful projects is when we see, like, multiple stakeholders in the room, right? So when I say that, I don't mean, this person from your team, this other person from another team. I mean, like, when we see folks like ITC Fed, right, in the room with, like, saying, we're helping with defining the implementation, we're helping with defining the outcomes, right? And you're a part of that, right? Like, I see people move to a lot quicker towards their outcomes, and a lot more, and they've got folks like John who are defining how they're going to move up their maturity model, like how they're going to go achieve those goals, right? In partnership, right? Then we just see folks moving to success faster. We see people moving to higher bars of success faster, right? So oftentimes these projects have sort of, set of goals, first set of goals, right? And then there's the second set of goals, right? And I mentioned the maturity model type of idea, right? It's like, then we're going to go up level and get more value and move faster through our mission the next time, right? And in this context, right, just having those partners in the room that are able to help, right, is super valuable, right? So that's what I would add.
Definitely. Our last audience question comes from Philip, and he's asking about decentralized storage providers such as SC Prime. He's basically wondering if any thoughts are around that. Do you all have any opinions or thoughts on decentralized storage providers and how it might be a benefit in this space?
And out there, I think, from a resiliency factor, if I'm reading or understanding the question, obviously a lot of benefits. I go back to, taking a look at all the options out there, whether it's cloud, just, doing that upfront roadmap and understanding what's the real requirement. And if super high resiliency and having zero kind of failover with complete, 100% type design, A lot of times it comes down to cost. You know, I think almost anything can be done. It's you just start trading off with cost. And so I think there's a lot of great options out there, whether it's cloud or more product based, and then how you implement that. But I think you know, goes back to some of the comments, you know, Imran and Josh have been making. Understand what the goal is, and then really it's most of the time right now, I think there's so much innovation. It's really just a trade-off with cost and risk and level of effort. But you can engineer almost anything now. And I think that's a great spot to be in. And then just trying to leverage what's best overall.
Definitely. It seems like you can't hit every solution to every single problem there. So you have to figure out what the cost benefit analysis is and decide what's right for you. I'd love to end our conversation thinking about what's ahead and the future of cloud technology, but also just federal information technology in general. So what excites you all most about the future? And we can start with John. Let's go back to you.
Sure. So I mean, it's to me, I think data, you know, like I think for years, this was, you know, we talked whether it was cloud or we talked about, you know, servers and things. I mean, now we're to the point where the only reason we did all that was to try and get this data in a spot that you can more effectively leverage it. And, you know, once again, I don't want to throw out Gen AI, but that's got everybody's interest, right? Everybody wants to talk about it. And I kind of sit back and say, great, where's your data? And unless you have that in some place, whether it's your own data fabric or whether you buy it from somebody or what, you can't do anything unless, if you play around with this technology, it's like, okay, point it to your data sources. Where's your data? And so I think I'm really hopeful that this really is a big wave where people go, okay, got to make sure my data is something I can kind of access and use. And then I think we're in the middle or the very beginning of just a wild kind of period of innovation, as much as we've seen in the last well over decade. So I'm very excited, but I think it comes back to kind of an oldie but a goodie, which is data. Where's your data? And then how do you get insights from it? So I'm really, really excited, especially in public sector. I'm hoping this will be a driver for a real new, a next wave of just wild innovation across industry and government.
Thank you, John. Josh, what excites you?
I'm not sure I could have said it better than John. Honestly, I exactly what John said times two. You know, data, AI, and you know, the only thing I'd say about AI is like, imagine AI right now, whatever you think AI can do, AI ops, ML, whatever else, right? I want you to think about that as like barely scratching the surface of this type of capability or technology. Like, you should be thinking that like whatever we have now is going to look like listening to a radio broadcast for your entertainment after dinner at night in the living room, right? Versus like on demand 3D television in your house, right? I mean, it's like, it's just not like, so the only thing I would say is like AI is like at the very beginning, and we hopefully all of us will get the chance to see it really blossom, mature, become life-changing things in our lifetimes. So that's what I'm excited about.
Definitely. It really is exciting. And I think an analogy that you'd used before was thinking of technology as a freight train that you really can't stop. It's moving forward and we all kind of have to hop on board in some ways. Imran, what excites you about the future of federal IT and cloud technology and all of it?
It's just absolutely, mind-boggling. And sometimes I say small things and people say, you are an engineer by background and you understand this thing that you're still wondering how did it happen and all that, right? It is such an exciting time, to be honest. What I've seen in the last, let's say, year or so is that how things have moved from, there were times when we had assembly language and third generation languages and fourth generation languages and so on, right? Everything is becoming closer and closer to natural way of communicating and expecting real-time results for that, right? So, people say English is the most powerful programming language now, right? So, and everything that we are doing today, the platforms that we build, everything is there to accelerate what we want to see, the features, the functions out of these devices. We used to type it in and get the response. Now we want to say it. And now people, are, putting chips in the brain and, helping with those, debilitating kind of diseases, right? Helping those people in terms of, so, I mean, that's supporting humanity in some of those where the healthcare issues are, some of those things in a much accelerated fashion. That's what I think the hope is. Obviously, any powerful tool can be used for, destructive purpose as well. But I think with all these things, I think that for humanity itself, the tools, the way to, the accelerated way of achieving those outcomes in a much shorter period, or even seconds, right, or milliseconds now, right? I think that's where it's mind-boggling to see what my grandchildren would be laughing at me when I show them my, iPhone or something. Say, did you use that brick to communicate? Something like that. Yeah. So yeah, it's plenty exciting time.
And we're only scratching the surface of it all. So I think we can all say that we're excited what's to come. Well, thank you all to our panelists as well as our audience for joining us for this discussion. Hopefully you've all learned about some new innovations in the cloud space, but also best practices, and you can take these with you as you apply them to your daily jobs. Keep an eye out for our takeaways article that will come out soon, as well as a recording of today's webinar if you'd like to share it with your network. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Dariana, and thank you to the audience for such wonderful questions.
Thank you.